Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. Please could I ask everyone to note the fire safety instruction. There will be no fire drills planned for this evening. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the nearest exit and make your way to the assembly point located in the market car park adjacent to the Civic Suite building. Please do not return to the building unless given permission by council staff. I would also like to remind you please to switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent. Please note that the meeting will be live streamed where the proceedings are capable of repeated viewing. Please ensure that your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. Once finished speaking, can you please switch your microphone to avoid feedback noise? If you are seated in the public area of the chamber, it's likely that your image will be captured by the recording cameras and result in your image being part of the broadcast. If members are for any reason not present for the whole debate on an item, you should consider whether it would be appropriate for you to vote on that item. May I also remind members to declare any interest and the nature of that interest at the beginning of an agenda item, and that on declaring a pecuniary interest, you are required to leave the room when that item of business is considered. Thank you. Moving on to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Milne, who sends his apologies, Mrs Janine Huex, our independent member, Councillor Page and Councillor Vilma Wilson. Item 2, substitute members. Councillor Sharp is substituting for Councillor Milne and Councillor Cross for Councillor Page. There are no non-members attending. Item 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of September 2024. Are those minutes agreed, members? Okay, thank you. Those minutes are agreed. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, there are none. Thank you. Item 6, public questions on notice. None have been received. Moving on to agenda item 7, the proposed amendments to the Constitution Working Group. Members, we will now consider the report of the Monitoring Officer relating to the proposed amendments to the Council's current Constitution. Paul Birkinshaw will present the report. Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. This report obviously presents some recommendations from the working group. That working group comprised Councillor F.D. Lambourne, James Newport and Vilma Wilson. So they have met on a number of occasions to review the work that's set out in this report, and they're planning and are currently doing some further work, particularly looking at procedure rules. But this report deals with a number of matters and the recommendations which I'll go through. The revisions to the articles of the Constitution is attached at Appendix A, and I must apologise because I've just realised that the appendix should have shown as track changes, but it didn't. A track change has been accepted. I think a track changes version was circulated to some members, and I will ensure that that is in the council agenda. Obviously, what we're asking this committee to do tonight is to make recommendations to full council. But if I can just draw out within there, the changes are made primarily just to provide further clarity on matters. There's nothing really that the working group were asked to make a determination on as to whether they felt it was a choice upon those. We have expanded on Article 2, page 7.14, just to talk about political groups, for example. So we talk about how political groups are composed, and that just reflects the regulations. But I think it's helpful for that to be within the Constitution, to understand how members, when elected, become. We've also added some reference in there to the role of chairman and vice chairman of committees. You'll see that that's quite general and generic, and around the leader and the deputy leader of the council as well. So I think that's quite an important point. Some of the other changes are just to clarify and amplify some matters. I have also, with the working group, proposed to add, we've changed Article 6 to talk about committees in their more broadest sense. And you can see in here quite a lot actually in the articles is just linking to other bits in the Constitution later. So what I like to do within the Constitution is to ensure that you can read across and we see them. So that's what Article 6 tends to do. There wasn't an article in there regarding the council standards arrangement. So particularly as monitoring officer joining the council, when I looked at that, well, how many independent persons do we have and how's it composed and how that's dealt with? That wasn't there. So we have Article 7 is an entirely new article. Again, it just sets out the arrangements which the council has already adopted. There is an asterisk on page 7.24 in terms of the number of independent persons, and you'll recall that council at its recent meeting agreed that there will be 2 independent persons, and so I'll make sure that's updated as well before it goes on to full council. And I think, of recollection, Article 8 is also a new one around community consultation and participation. As I say, in terms of the articles, there's not... they're there really just to provide clarity on existing matters and ensure effective links to other elements of the Constitution. But I do apologise, I should have checked before that you had that. I will circulate it to you members here this evening following this meeting so that you have good sight of them. But I will ensure that version is included in the council report as well. The second recommendation is around some revisions to council procedure rules. Those are set out, Chairman, in Appendix B, and there's a number of issues within here where the Constitution Work Group have exercised more discretion than perhaps they did do in revising the articles. This deals with a number of issues. Again, I think track changes would have helped, but in essence the changes are to allow chairman of policy committees to make announcements. The only member at the moment is a leader of the council or the chair vice chair. Referring back to Article 2, I think it was, around members of the council, that talks about the role of chairman in leading the remit of their committee and the role of committee members in that, in leading the remit within. And therefore the working group felt it was appropriate that the chairman of that committee, as the lead member, equally the chairman or vice chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee, who has an important role to play and may wish to have announcements to full council, should be permitted to do that. But there was a desire that that is limited so that we don't see particularly long announcements, and there was recognition of the role of the chairman. The other recommendation is to bring forward the deadline for motions and questions. Questions is currently 3 working days, I think, in advance, and motions 5 working days in advance. The working group and personally felt it would be helpful for them to be consistent and for them to be 6 working days in advance, particularly for motions. That allows any issues to be addressed rather than just trying to deal with them on the day of the agenda also being dispatched. And it also allows questions that have been received to be included and published in the agenda rather than them being absent from the published agenda and then circulated separately. So the working group certainly felt there was sense in that approach and were supportive of it. And they did wish to add something in. The other issue was around questions, that there was an anomaly in there. Apologies, that's not shown, but if I look at 13.1 of the Constitution, it says that members may ask as many questions as is necessary to aid understanding of the item. And then 13.2 talks about each member may ask a maximum of 1 question without notice on each of the reports submitted by the leader or the chairman of the committee. So there's an anomaly there, which is it. And the working group felt that it's about asking as many as is necessary to aid understanding, and therefore have removed 13.2 from there. It was again a shared consensus just to address that point. The third one, sorry, Chairman, a long introduction, but necessary in light of the appendices, was around parish representation in the standards arrangements, and members of this committee that were present at, I think, the last meeting certainly expressed their view that there should be parish representation in the council standards arrangements. I mentioned at the last meeting that the working group were looking at that, and as you'll see, they've made a recommendation back to give the effect to that. The working group did feel that that would most appropriately come into place at the annual council meeting, rather than seeking to invite a parish representative now, that then by the time we get into place, we're looking for a new one a couple of months later. The final recommendations, I think, are around the employment committee. So currently where we're appointing senior officers and they're joint officers across both Brentwood and Rochford, we end up with this twin-tracked approach that comes to this committee to set a panel, then a panel is set and then that panel meets and then it comes back. The same happens at Brentwood, and it's quite cumbersome, and I don't think it's helpful for members particularly, but also officers and applicants. Therefore, the proposal that a joint committee be established, which would comprise representatives of Brentwood and representatives of Rochford, an equal number, and they would simply meet and make a decision and a recommendation to council if as necessary. This report just presents that as a proposal in principle that will not come into effect at this time. It will be a matter upon which council is asked to give further consideration when establishing committees at the annual council meeting in May. But it just sets out a direction of travel that the working group think is helpful. And finally, the other point was around the start time of meetings, which is dealt with in the report. And the report proposes from the working group that we trial an earlier start time for committees of 7 p.m, just for the period January to March, full council meetings to remain at 7:30. And then members collectively can take a view on that matter following that trial. I think the only point I would add to that, and having discussed with the chairman earlier, that just to reiterate that this committee has been asked to make recommendations to full council on all their matters, and certainly I suspect in the final recommendation as well as others, all members of the council may have a view, and therefore that may be a matter that's more appropriately determined at full council when all members can decide whether they wish to go for that trial or not. So apologies, Chairman, for having to provide a longer introduction as a result of some of the track changes not shown, but hope that's helpful, and I'll take any questions. And as I say, this is recommendations to full council.
Thanks, Paul. Any members have any questions? Councillor Button.
Thank you, Chairman. I find myself in some difficulty here for the very reason that Mr. Birkinshaw points out to start with, because I read this and looked at the articles. They're complex documents, and what I would have liked to have seen was the original, the amendment, and a brief definition of what it was seeking to do. And then you can absorb it, and then you can come to a meeting and ask sensible questions, or hopefully sensible questions. My difficulty is that I'm absolutely sure that all the changes are well-intentioned, but constitutions are a little bit like an insurance policy. Until you actually want to use the constitution to give a view on something, you don't know whether or not it's going to give the view that you want or whether it's inadequate. A bit like when you make a claim in an insurance claim, the very thing that you're claiming for possibly isn't covered within the policy. So I've got some difficulty, and I stress not for any reason to disagree, but simply I think that we should be informed before we vote on something. So I can't vote, I'm afraid, on R or in favour of R1 or R2. Certainly, personally, I agree with R3. Certainly, I agree with R4. And I'll be honest with you, Chairman, I'm very uneasy about this stealth approach to changing committee times, because I fully understand the difficulty for officers, but equally, in the interest of openness and transparency, our meetings are supposed to be at a convenient time, not only for members, but also for members of the public. So I have some difficulty because trials tend to be, well, let's do a trial and then we'll just slip into the new arrangements without anyone really noticing. Personally, I don't have a problem with 7 o'clock, but thinking of the wider issues of people getting back from London, if they're commuting or if they're commuting anywhere, held up in traffic or whatever, they've then got to travel through the rush hour. Having a bite to eat is as important for members as it is for members of staff, and that's not in any way taking anything away from people's rights to have an enjoyable life. So I have difficulty with this report, and sadly it's not for any motive other than genuinely wanting to understand what the changes are through the process that I described a bit earlier. So there we are. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor Button. Mr. Birkinshaw, do you want to pick up the R1 and R2? Because that, I take it, we'll reissue this document with the track changes on it.
Yeah, I appreciate Councillor Wootton's point. That's fine. I think if we can deal with R2 first, which is around council procedurals, I think that's probably a little easier for members and hopefully can provide some comfort by explaining what they are without necessarily reference to. So just to remind, that was simply, currently it says that announcements can be made by the Chief Executive, the Chairman, Vice Chairman, or the Leader of the Council. And that the proposed amendment is to also add, as well as chairs of policy committees and the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee. And that's in recognition simply that they lead the remit, that they're appointed their committee, and therefore they may wish to make announcements to full council. So I think that has a degree of sense to it. I think the other one is, again, ignoring the necessary amendments to the council procedurals, which I simply do to give effect, is to bring forward the deadline for motions and questions to 6 working days in advance, from 3 and 5, for the reasons which are set out in terms of consistency, allowing questions to be in the published agenda, and also allowing a little more time in case a motion, for example, is submitted that may be well-intentioned but may just need a slight revision. We find ourselves running around on the day of publication, and in some cases may have to say, well, sorry, we can't list that, when actually we could have got to a point that we could. And finally, that anomaly, which I think was well accepted and certainly has been discussed with all groups, to say, look, it says one question or it says all questions. Well, it's all questions. You can ask as many questions as you like to aid understanding. So the suggestion that you can only ask one is an anomaly. It duplicates and simply do. So I think I would hope that on R2, which I think would be more beneficial to put in, that it would be helpful to move that on from committee this evening. I think in terms of R1, the options are that we could just put the track changes in, but I accept that you've not had sight of them, and therefore reasonably members may wish to defer them and have to bring them back to the next meeting and make a separate recommendation upon them. Members could refer them on and generally being happy, and with a track changes version being in the council agenda. So I apologise and fully understand that point. I think if R2 should be easier for members, and hopefully Councillor Wootton has some assurance that that is the amendments that are being made, R1 might be a stretch too far for members of the committee and they may wish to defer that. As I've said, the articles simply set out the arrangements that already exist, so it doesn't change any arrangements, whereas actually R2 does allow us to address a couple of issues and in my mind make some improvements, and the sooner we can make improvements the better. I've no issue with deferring R1 because it simply provides clarity on matters that already exist, so it's not going to change anything.
Councillor Wootton.
Thank you, Chairman. I think huge appreciation to the monitoring officer for setting out the thinking behind R2, and in the light of his further comments and my earlier comments, I now feel able to personally support R2, but I don't withdraw anything that I said about R1, but hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Councillor Wootton. So further to Councillor Wootton's comments and the fact that we need to see the track changes, I'm going to move from the chair that we defer recommendation 1 of the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor O'Leary, thank you. Those in favour of deferment of recommendation 1 of the report, please raise your hands. Those against? Those abstaining? Thank you. Okay, that item, recommendation 1, has been deferred. Members, I will now move a motion from the chair that recommendations 2, 3, 4 and 5 be approved. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you. Councillor Lambourne, do you wish to take these on block or do you want to go through each one? Councillor Wootton.
Chairman, I propose each one. Yes, please.
Oh, thank you very much, members. We now move on to item 8, which is the Internal Progress Report 2024-25. Members we will now consider the report of the Audit and Counter Fraud Manager, providing an update of the work of the internal audit team. And Mr. Porter will present this report.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to apologise for an amended copy of my report. I just wanted to bring to members a more up-to-date picture in terms of recommendations. So you've been provided with an updated report at enclosure 1. In terms of delivery of the audit plan for 2024-25, if I can refer members to 8.7 of the original agenda pack. The table at 8.7 provides a copy of the original audit plan that was agreed back in March by members, and this takes you through every audit that was in the plan and the current state of play in terms of delivery of each of those audits. We've currently got 2 audit reports at the draft report stage, which is debt management and fees and charges, which we're looking to clear and make those final. There's a couple of audits identified in there in relation to member inquiries and scheme of delegation. They will now be deferred until next year. But we are looking to pick up an additional audit, which is an examination of the Norse contract. So we'll be looking at the Norse contract, which relates to waste management and street cleansing. So that'll be an additional item in the audit plan. In terms of audit recommendations, there's where the changes are happening from my previous report. So as at the 21st of November 24, we have 31 live recommendations, of which only 7 are overdue based on the due date for implementation. The picture in relation to audit recommendations continually changes as recommendations are implemented and we complete new audits. So basically, the number of audit recs, the number of completed recs continually changes day by day. So that, just like to highlight to you, currently in a good position. I can give members assurance that it is an item that features on regular corporate leadership team meetings. There is challenge in terms of the state of play of recommendations. We recognise the importance that members have in relation to audit recommendations. So I can give you assurance that recommendations constantly feature on our radar. We're continually looking at recommendations and why they're not being implemented and discussing with management any revised implementation dates. So at the moment, we only have 31 live audit recommendations, and each of those recommendations is highlighted or listed at Appendix 2, so you can have a look at each recommendation and where we're at in terms of progress made. I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Members, are there any questions for Mr. Porter? Okay, there are no questions. That agenda item is for noting only. Is that noted, members? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 9 is the risk management update. Members will now consider the report of the Strategic Director of Finance, updating members of the Audit Committee on the status of the Council's 2024 to 25 Strategic Risk Register. Mr. Dickinson will present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I just thought I'd highlight there's one very high risk, which is the risk around cyber security and cyber attacks. And there's significant work currently being taken and reviewing that. The change to some risk scores. There's an asset delivery program has been reviewed, and due to ongoing discussions on the termination of the partnership, the risk has been lowered. The current leisure for risk 20, the current leisure operator fails to complete outstanding dilapidations, as that has just gone out to tender. That risk has and to award now, that risk has been reduced. And then there are a couple of new risks added. An increase in the numbers approaching homelessness, resulting in a lack of available temporary accommodation, and failure to develop an environmental strategy and action plan due to lack of engagement. So it's just for updating.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Councillor Sharp. Thank you. Any other questions or observations? Okay, thank you. That item is for noting only. Is that item noted, members? Thank you. Moving on to item 10, the Statement of Accounts 2021-2022 and 2022 to 2023. Members will now consider the report of the Strategic Director of Resources seeking the approval of the Statement of Accounts for 21-22 and 22-23, and Mr. David Dickinson will present the report.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a saga has been going on for a while. The 2021-22 accounts and 22 have been mainly audited, but haven't actually have been completed, and 22-23 haven't been audited at all. But this is looking to bring a close to that and to have the accounts in a way signed off. If I could hand over to Lorenz from EY just to provide an update and a bit of a background, and yeah, thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Audit Committee members. I'm here on behalf of Debbie Hanson, as she has a personal appointment to attend tonight, so she sends her apology. For Rochport District Council, we issued the audit completion
Chairman.
report.
My apologies. Last week we were booming every time we spoke into microphones. This week it's quite soft. Is it possible to increase the volume at all, or?
Can, is it okay now? Yeah. So we issued the audit completion report to those charged with governance yourselves, which contains the information for 2 years of audit, which is the 21-22 and 22-23. In relation to the value for money reports, this had been presented by Debbie Hanson to the Audit and Governance Committee on the 3rd of September meeting. So no new risk or weakness identified from then to today. This is in section 4 of our audit completion report. For the financial statement audits that David is updating us. So for 21-22 audit, we were unable to complete all the procedures on the 21-22 financial statements due to combination of the capacity issues and audit team changes, which within EY, which impacted on the delivery of the audit, as well as some delays on the responses from the council caused in part by the timing of the audit. For 22-23, we have performed minimum procedures as required under the ISA, such as the draft accounts casting and review of the comparatives and any amendments from the original published accounts to be able to move to disclaim audit opinion in line with the statutory instrument 907, the Accounts and Regulation 2024. So to give you an idea, the legislation was enacted on the 30th of September 2024 regarding the backstop dates. And for 22-23 and below years, this will be on the 13th of December 2024. So due to this and the wider requirements of the local audit system reset, it meant that we did not have the required resources available to complete the detailed audit procedures that would be needed to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to issue an unmodified audit report on the 21-22 and 22-23 financial statements before the backstop date, which is the 13th of December 2024. Therefore, we are disclaiming our opinions on the financial statements for these years. Taking all this together, and the draft wording for the disclaimed opinion is on the section 3 of our report. So your responsibilities as an Audit and Governance Committee is to approve the 21-22 and 22-23 financial statements and provide letter of representations as normal. Debbie Hanson is planning to sign the 21-22 accounts tomorrow, and for the 22-23, this will be on the 13th of December because it's the inspection period is currently ongoing and it will end on the 13th of December 2024. Just also to give you an update for 23-24 audit, it's progressing okay and it's on track to be completed before the backstop date for the 23-24, which is on the 28th of February 2025. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Referring to the delay in the formal approval, how do we benchmark against other local authorities in terms of the progress of these, the formal signing off?
Yeah, so
Councillor Sharp.
Just assuming that we are not in breach of any local government regulations in terms of this delayed sign off. Is that so?
the statutory instrument that was enacted is for all the 22-23 years below, 22-23 and below years to be signed off by the 13th of December 2024. So you are the Rochefort District Council will be signed off before that date. So yes.
Thank you.
I know that if Councillor Milne was here tonight, that's one of the questions that he'd be asking, and has for some time. There was an article in the paper the other day, and it was saying something like 300 councils are in the same position as us. So it's not that we've done anything wrong. It's actually the system of being able to carry out these audits. It's just fallen not by the wayside, but it's just way behind what it should be. Is that a fair assessment, Mr. Dickinson?
Yeah, that's correct. And because the 2021, 22 and 23, 24 accounts have had substantial work on there can be some assurance there, but the 2022, 23 will not be audited at all. So that there will be that concern, but as I said, it's happening across the country.
Any further questions, members? Yeah.
Not a question, just to point out, obviously, in terms of the recommendations, it refers to the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee. I think to get these completed, they're going to be signed off quickly, so we just add into the recommendations perhaps where it says on chair of the Audit and Governance Committee, or in his absence, the vice chairman. And Councillor Wilson will do that. So if members are happy, we'll just insert them words into recommendations 2 and 4 to recognise in Councillor Milne's absence, Councillor Stuart Wilson will sign them.
I was more comfortable when it was Councillor Milne. Thank you. No one else is indicating. So, members, I'll now move a motion from the chair that the recommendations 1, 2 and 4 and that recommendation 3 is to note be approved. Can I have a seconder, please?
Sorry, Chair. Can we separate R1 out, please? I'd like to vote on R1 independently, or do them all
Do
independently,
we want to
however.
take them on block then?
Yes, no, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll vote for the recommendation. So recommendation R1, approve the 2021-22 financial statements. Those in favour? Okay, 6. Those against? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. That recommendation is approved. Recommendation 2, delegate the approval of the 2022-23 financial statements to the Section 151 officer and the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee, or in their absence, the vice chair. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. That recommendation is carried. Recommendation 3 is to note the external auditor's annual completion report. Is that noted? Thank you. Then recommendation 4, give delegation for the signing of the letter of representation for both years to the chair of the audit committee, or in his absence to the vice chairman, to be signed outside of committee. Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. That recommendation is approved. Moving on to item 11, the Quarter 2 Treasury Management Update. Members will now consider the report of the Director of Resources providing an update of the Council's Treasury Management activity for the period the 1st of April 2024 to the 30th of September 2024. And Mr Dickinson will be presenting that.
Thank you, Chair. It's a Q2 report, so there's not a lot changed from Q1. Rochford has quite a stable cash position, and but overall the forecast is for about 1.25 million, so that's a substantial above budget amount of around about 601,000. Just looking at the investment, so there's quite a lot of money with the banks, with Handelsbanken. They've got 6 million, or you've got 6 million. There was a question at the last meeting about Prime, so that's actually Federated Prime. It's a big American money market fund and investment fund. And then there's another 5 million with Deutsche and HSBC, and then 3 million with Lloyds. So overall, the strategy is getting around about 5%, which is just above benchmark. It's fairly straightforward. You can pretty much put money anywhere, and you'll get around about 5%. But we're going into a period now where the rates are coming off, and so there's going to be a review of the investments, looking to move a bit of the money out of the banks and looking at other options around maybe local authorities, and just trying to look at the cash that Rochford is holding. And there's quite a lot that doesn't move. It has quite a stable cash balance, and it's had that for a number of years. So just looking at just maybe the first bit of the cash, maybe the first 10 million, just looking to extend the duration a bit there. But outside of that, it's very, very positive year so far, and with the investments currently held, it's likely that 1.2 million will be achieved.
Thank you, David. Any members with questions on this item? Councillor Sharp.
Just for clarification, in terms of that investment strategy, is that meaning that you would be looking to move some of the 15 million that is immediately liquid into a short-term deposit at a fixed rate? Oh, sorry.
So that's the intention. It's just to look, but also there's a 3-month notice account with Santander, so looking at that and just building up a position where we've got a rolling small amount, so between 2 and 3 million with other councils. It's a safe investment, but it's also you're able to get quite a good return. But there will be quite a lot of due diligence taken on each council before any investment is made. But we'll remove, because there is currently quite a bit of risk around holding everything with banks and money market funds. It's not a massive risk, but there's that risk there. So it's just looking to reduce that risk, but also add a bit of duration to the investments.
Have another question, probably an observation, and it's in relation to this announcement that was made a couple of weeks or so ago by the Chancellor in terms of consolidating local authority pension schemes into maybe 5 or 6 bundles to achieve maybe greater investment returns and also for investment. So are we as a council waiting upon the white paper for that, or are we doing any work in preparation for that?
Currently, no. I think we're waiting for the white paper. These durations that we're looking at aren't going past probably 9 months. It'll be 9 months a year, so there'll be a lot of time where we could look at that. But currently, there's shared service, well, there's a joint service with Brentwood, but we wouldn't want to look to mix money with Brentwood. It's two separate councils, 2 separate investment strategies, 2 separate bits of money. So I can't see that happening anytime soon, because if there was an issue, then it would be how does that money get divvied out and who's responsible. So currently we wouldn't, but if there were to be consolidation of councils, then there would be that would be a likely outcome, that there would be pooling money.
Sorry, I thought that we were part of the Essex County scheme, and therefore that would embrace Brentwood and Rochford. As a pension scheme, that is. My question is relating purely to the pension arrangements, not investment.
Okay. I know a lot about the collective investment vehicles and that side, but I don't know specifically how it will affect Rochford and Brentwood, so I'll need to come back on that. But yeah, I'll need to come back on that.
Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick observation that I think the macroeconomic analysis in here is really, really interesting and well presented. Just as a suggestion going forward, maybe we could chuck in an acronym buster on the end of it for people who perhaps aren't familiar with financial markets. Just an idea.
Noted. Yeah.
Okay, no one else is indicating. Members, this report is to note only. Is this noted? Okay. Lorenzo and David and Mike as well. Would you like, if you wish to leave, you can do. But you don't know what you're going to miss. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 12, which is the annual government statement 2023-24 update. Members will now consider the report of the monitoring officer providing an update on the progress to date in delivering against the annual governance statement action plan. And Paul Birkinshaw will present the report.
We're booming again, Chairman, I think. The annual governance statement, so this was approved by this committee earlier in the municipal year, and we added a recommendation in there, and a resolution was subsequently made to receive a mid-year progress update. So we will report final progress against the identified actions in the annual governance statement, but we felt that rather than waiting until then, it would be helpful to give members some assurance that we were addressing the issues that we had identified in the annual governance statement as some areas for improvement, and that's what this report does. So there's a number of actions which you agreed in the annual governance statement. That forms part of the accounts which you've just dealt with. And we set out progress in here, hopefully, and I think looking at the report and the actions that have been taken, it provides assurance to members that we are actively addressing the issues that were identified in the annual governance statement. Some of them have been complete, in particular the corporate plan. Other work is ongoing actively. Contract procedurals and financial regulations are obviously on the agenda for this meeting, so that kind of points to that. And obviously it talks about the need to ensure that we continue to operate an effective committee system, part of which is reviewing the constitution, which we've talked about, but we recognise that there's further work to do there. We will obviously bring to you an annual governance statement with regards to 24-25. That'll report and assess our effectiveness against the broader governance arrangements, but the delivery of these actions. But I think hopefully it provides members with some assurance at this time that when we do come to the end of this municipal year, we'll have acted and actioned those areas that we had identified previously.
Thank you. Any members with any questions on the report? Just, if I recollect on this, I think members wanted a sort of update rather than wait to the end of the municipal year to get this information in. This has given us given me a good feeling of where we are and that progress is being made. Members, I'll now move a motion from the chair that the recommendation 1 be approved. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sharp, thank you. Those in favour of the recommendation? Thank you. That is unanimous. Excuse me. Item 13, the Green Gateway trading. Members will now consider the report of the Director of Environment relating to the future of Green Gateway Trading (brackets grounds maintenance close brackets limited) and the rest of the Green Gateway Trading Group of companies. And Marcus Houghton will present the report.
Thank you. Good evening, members. So this report was originally going to go to Council on the 18th of June 2024, and it set out the recommendation to strike off the Green Gateway trading companies and return a dividend of the balance, I think about £26,000 balance to the Council as a shareholder. I think subsequently on the sort of publication of the report, there were concerns raised, and so the report was delayed to sort of address those concerns with members. I think in hindsight, I think the members were satisfied with the explanation. So there's a fairly forensic, detailed explanation from finance team about why the balance was as such as it was, and I think and that's a reflection of the balance have been so healthy the year before, and all of a sudden you see this significant drop. But it was just really just historic payments had to be addressed, and it was basically tidying up of the end of a contract. So, there had been some slippage in some of the work that needed to be delivered over that time, particularly through COVID. So we took a light touch approach. But once you know a contract is going to come to an end, then you want to see that work being delivered. And so there's some catch up and expenditure towards the end. So I think there was an explanation. I think in hindsight, I think, if there's lessons learned, this is, in sort of the audit sort of meeting here, then I would suggest the reporting, the annual reporting, did not occur. I think that was in hindsight something that should have occurred. If you recollect, we used to have the investment board. I think that was the mechanism it was meant to report into. So I think with the demise of the investment board, I think there was a bit of a gap there as to the reporting mechanism that it should have gone into. So I suspect had the annual reports gone in with the explanations as we went along, then there wouldn't have been that surprise at the end for some members that, well, there we go, this is the final balance. But I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions, members? Okay, no one's indicated. Members, I'll now move a motion from the chair that recommendation 1.1 and 1.2 be approved. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor O'Leary, thank you. Are you happy to take these on block? Okay, thank you. We now vote on the recommendations. R1, that the committee recommends to full council 1, that the council approves the payment of a dividend to the shareholder of the remaining balance of Green Gateway Trading (GM) Limited as set out in the report, and 2, that the council approves the striking off of Green Gateway Trading Limited, Green Gateway (GM) Limited, and Green Gateway Trading Development Limited. Those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. That is unanimous. Item 14, Contract Award Review. Members will now consider the report of the Monitoring Officer relating to the findings of a review of the decision to award a contract for a development partner for the Council's Asset Delivery Programme. Paul Birkinshaw will present the report.
Yes, Chairman. This report represents a report that came to the Audit Committee back on the 27th of September 2023. So that was prior to me, obviously, joining the authority. But you considered the report at that time and it was exempt due to the ongoing negotiations with GB Partnerships. But I think the committee made clear that it would like to see the report made public at the earliest opportunity once those negotiations had been concluded. Members will be aware of, obviously at full council recently, you received a report and noted that the settlement had been made and a public statement has been issued following that, and therefore we're now available to put this report in essence into the public domain, which this report to the Audit Committee does by default. It also sets out some of those area actions arising from the independent review. Some of them, obviously, many rely on the contract procedurals and financial regulations, which we've come on to. Some further work around partnerships, but again, that work is actively taking place. And finally, around document retention policy. And I think there's a report coming to the relevant committee in January, which I was at a meeting earlier talking about, or actually the 8th of February, bringing a document retention policy as well as other data protection policies. So again, a very active piece of work. So hopefully members can take some assurance that we are actively addressing the actions identified from the report. And as I've said, the primary purpose as well is to get this into the public domain, as was the wish of the Audit and Governance Committee expressed back in September 2023.
Members, are there any questions on this item? Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Look, I can't say that I've read the report word for word, but it's a pretty fair and balanced report. But in several places it makes reference to the fact of documents not having been retained. And that is obviously a concern, but I actually find it inconceivable in this day and age with our electronic systems that reports weren't actually retained. You know, there's this sweeping statement about retention, and clearly it's a pointer for those responsible for retention periods to look at it and make sure that it happens. So I'm not in any way taking issue with that. So if it serves as a pointer, that's good news. But I just find it inconceivable. I just don't, I can't accept it. And I wonder to what extent there was a real search done. I mean, for example, I was never approached about what documents I might have in my possession. They may not be electronic, but to justify reports not being retained, I just don't accept it. And I wonder whether officers who have moved on but are still relatively local to the district, they were consulted. I just wonder to what degree they you know, the world that we live in, nothing is actually shredded these days. We might think it's shredded, but it disappears into all sorts of areas. So I've got real questions over the statement about retention of these documents, because I'm not satisfied of how hard they were looked for, or whether the people looking for them actually understood who to go to. But the bottom line is, I think it's a real eye-opener to make sure that documents are. So perversely, it's a good statement, but it's the specifics here that I have concerns with. But pretty balanced, pretty good report. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wotton. I take your point. I think it would be a bit unfair, as Mr. Birkinshaw wasn't here at the time. But is that something you could take on board?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Happy to offer some comment. And as you say, it's difficult to understand the exact thing. I'd like to think there was fairly rigorous to try locate some of the documents. But we've seen it in other areas, and obviously not just around document retention. To give some members assurance, I've assumed the role of Senior Information Risk Owner, CIRO, which means I'm kind of responsible largely for effective information governance now within the organisation. In response to that, we have established an information governance group. We have recently commissioned a piece of work to assess the Council's information governance framework and arrangements that exist, with a view to develop an action plan around how we need to improve that. And that information governance group also has oversight across cybersecurity and data protection, so we're trying to take a more holistic view. So it's certainly an issue that's high on my agenda. I take that role of CIRO seriously, and therefore putting in place the necessary mechanisms to deal with that. I think obviously with some of the issues on this is around the frameworks and the systems can be in place. It's then about making sure that people follow that, in order that when people do move on to different places, different organisations, leave the council, that we retain them. I think part of the problem is emails are often used as a document file repository, and that can be quite difficult to locate amongst a large amount. So in response, I take Councillor Wotton's points. I have obviously some sympathy with that. We would like to be able to recall and provide any document that we're required to do. The reality is that that's not always the case, but certainly a lot of work is ongoing, and we hope to see significant improvements over the next 6 to 12 months to provide assurance to members that we do have that effective information governance in place and that this does not arise in the future. I don't feel, Chairman, I can unfortunately provide a great deal more than that, except hopefully some assurance to members.
Thank you. Members, this report is to note only. Is it noted? Okay. Item 15, Financial Regulations and Contract Procedure Rules. Members will now consider the report of the Strategic Director of Finance presenting the revised financial regulations and contract procedure rules. And David Dickinson will present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report follows on from the previous one where financial reg updates and the contract procurement rules update was mentioned quite a lot. So specifically on the contract procedure rules, they were out of date, but they also needed updating for the changes that are going to happen in February 2025. And so this report has been the contract procedure rules have been updated. An external person was brought in to update them, and there have been quite significant changes to bring it up to date to be in line with the Procurement Act of 2023. And then the financial regs, they've been updated quite significantly by the same person. The changes to the old regs are substantial. The revised regulation is more comprehensive than the old regulations, including expansion of expanded reserve section and more detail on authorising payments. The revised regulations give officers more discretion, with ultimate constraint being the approved budget envelope, which is agreed by members. And each of the updates is in Appendix 1 and Appendix 2.
Members, are there any questions on this item? Okay, thanks. No one's indicating. Members, I'll now move a motion from the chair that recommendations A and B be approved. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor O'Leary, thank you. We'll now move to vote on the recommendations. Are you happy to vote on both recommendations together? Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is that the committee recommends to full council approval and adoption of A, revised contract procedure rules, Appendix 1, and revised financial regulations, Appendix 2. Those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you, members. That concludes our business for the evening. Thank you very much for your attendance, and the meeting